Chapter 13. It looks like the Burrows will have to live without you for a while longer, Violet said, when she brought in breakfast the next morning. What do you mean? Rue sat up in bed, squinting against the sunlight as Violet pulled back the curtains. Philip threw a fit when he heard you were leaving, Violet said. He threatened to have us both fired if you go. Miss Valentine's not too pleased about it, I can tell you. What does he want with me? Rue asked, too baffled to feel the full impact of the reprieve. Violet shrugged. Who knows? He's the most changeable person I've ever met. In any case, he's your ticket to stay here, so I can't imagine why you'd want to. If I were you, though, I'd try to be nice to him. He'll change his mind in a blink if you make him mad. Violet stared hard at Rue for a moment, cocking her head to one side. What? Rue asked, frowning. You have the greenest eyes, don't you? I don't know why I've never noticed before. It seems like they've gone greener, though. And you filled out, too. Do you know what my mother would say about you? Rue shook her head. She'd say, that girl's got a bloom on her. Bah, don't look at me like that. It's a good thing. It means you're shaping up to be nice looking. Rue scowled at this. I know what I look like. Do you? Next time you pass a mirror, take a good long look at it. You might just surprise yourself. Now go on. Eat your breakfast and get dressed. Your cousin wants to see you this morning. Don't ruffle his feathers if you can help it. Philip was still in bed when Rue came to his room, using the east wing hallway this time, rather than the secret passage. He looked paler than he had the day before, but he smiled when he saw her. It was a nice smile, too, Rue couldn't help but think. Sit down, he said, nodding toward the edge of his bed. They sat in silence for a while. Do you want to play canasta again? Rue asked finally. I'm not in the mood, he said. Fine, Rue replied. She stuffed her hands beneath her legs and rolled her eyes. Let Philip be difficult. It didn't matter. She was going to stay at Cough Rock. She could tend to her garden and maybe even see Jack again, and if Philip wanted to act like a brat, she would simply ignore him. What are you thinking about? He demanded. Rue shifted on the bed. I don't know. Nothing. Philip frowned down at his thick blankets, then rearranged them fitfully. Rue sighed and decided it would be in her best interest to at least try not to upset him. I was thinking about Jack, she said, not wanting to mention the garden. Who's Jack? He said the name in a contemptuous way that made Rue want to slap him. But she took a breath and tried to keep her voice even. He lives on the water. Hasn't Violet told you about him? Philip shook his head. So Rue told him all the stories that Violet had told her, and to her surprise, Philip seemed just as riveted as she had been when she had first heard them. Have you met him? Philip asked. Once. Did you like him? Yes. More than you like me. Philip said this as a statement of fact, and of course it was true. She didn't want to provoke him, though, so she quickly changed the subject. What's that song I keep hearing you humming? She asked. I don't hum songs, he said testily. Yes, you do, Rue said, her patience failing. They're not songs. Well, I heard you humming something. Philip let out a deep, exasperated breath, but Rue kept her eyes on him, waiting for an answer. It's just a thing my mother used to do, if you must know, Philip said. Hum? It was a special sort of humming. I can't do it the way she did. I try, but it's all wrong. She said it was something that the mothers in her village used to do. It was supposed to make the children grow up strong. She told me all kinds of stories about the jungle, about jaguars and macaws and spirits that live inside every tree and every plant. She told me about these vines that wrap themselves around trees all the way up to the top. Rue nodded. She knew those vines. The garden was covered with them. They're called lianas, he said. She told me that they're the tongues of jungle spirits, and if you want to summon someone, you should hold the end of a liana on a treetop and call out the person's name 3 times. They have to come if you do that, no matter where they are. She talked about the jungle all the time. My father built her a garden here in the house, and he filled it with plants and flowers and trees from the rainforest. My mother and I used to spend hours there, playing and climbing trees and vines and splashing around in the water. You've never seen a more beautiful garden in your life." While he spoke, Rue didn't move. She hardly breathed, afraid she would do something that might give away her secret. "What happened to it?" Rue asked quietly. "My father destroyed it," Philip said, his voice turning dark. "After she died, he tore the whole garden out and walled it up." "He doesn't know," Rue thought with relief. "Why did he do it?" Rue asked, remembering what Mrs. Wixton had said about people thinking Anna had been murdered. "I asked him once," Philip said. "He said something bad had happened there, and he hated to think about it, but that's all he'd say." Philip shifted in his bed and suddenly looked at Rue intently. "If I tell you something," he said, "will you keep it a secret?" "Okay. You promise?" he persisted. "I just said I would, didn't I?" "The first time I heard you behind that door," Philip said, his eyes darting toward the door that led to the passageway, "I thought it was my mother. But she's dead." Philip's gaze turned to Rue. There was a damp, feverish look in his eyes that Rue found unsettling. "She's still here," he said. "She's still in this house. I hear her." The words, spoken with such gravity in the darkened room, spooked Rue, but she quickly collected herself and replied tersely, "I don't believe in ghosts. My mother said the jungle was full of them." "She was just telling you stories," Rue said. "No, she wasn't," he protested. "Then she was silly and superstitious." "Shut up! What do you know anyway? You're just a thief. I heard Miss Valentine and Violet arguing about you this morning." "Miss Valentine said you were a thief. She said your foster mother warned her that you stole things." Rue felt her own anger rear up, and she drew back to slap him, but at the very last second she thought about the garden. She took a breath. Her body shook with the effort to control herself, but she stood up. "Where are you going?" Philip demanded. "I'll be back," she muttered, heading toward the doorway that led to the passageway. "No! You're lying! Where are you going?" He began to shriek again, but she turned on him now, her face full of fury, and warned, "If you start shrieking again, I won't come back at all." This stopped him, and he managed to keep his temper until Rue returned a few minutes later, holding something in her fist. She tossed it on the bed. "It's yours," she said. Philip picked it up and turned it this way and that. "A Meditas roll," he said. "A coyote Meditas roll." He looked up at her. "But where did you get it?" "I stole it." Philip eyed her suspiciously. "Why are you giving it back?" "So that the coyote won't limp."